There is a lot of like LinkedIn-esque debate right now about the difference between a DevOps engineer, a site reliability engineer, a platform engineer, and traditional quote unquote software engineer. And I think a lot of those debates are kind of looking in the wrong direction. Where ultimately, I think at a mature software org, these roles, which I'm going to talk about, are very similar. And the primary distinction here is a marketing and recruiting tool, not a delimiter of what you'll actually be always working on. And what that means, though, is I think there's been a big shift, and there is actually a role on the list of roles I've talked about here that I no longer apply to, and potentially in the near future, maybe 2 roles on here that I'm going to mostly avoid because of what that means from a marketing perspective that I don't think is talked about very much. So let's get into it, starting with this diagram you see on your screen right now. Of course, I had AI Excalidraw auto-generate what it thinks the difference between DevOps, platform, SRE, and software engineering all is. And I think this is where a lot of those like Medium-esque blog posts get on this subject, right? DevOps is on CI/CD and automation for deployment, and SRE is about reliability and incident management and SLIs, and platform engineering is about building internal platforms, and software engineers write the code of the products, right? You see this a lot all over the place. Now, there is some truth to, if you see a DevOps role, you're probably more likely to be working with Jenkins. If you're a platform engineer, you're probably going to be, on an organization or a part of the org that's focused on building internal tools. But I think the Venn diagram is much more overlapping than a lot of people give it credit, right? I think in modern, mature software organizations, which is the caveat that I'm going to keep using for reasons that'll come apparent later, ultimately you should be building tools and using software to solve organizational problems. If you're a software engineer, that could be, building for end users. But, I've been an SRE that's done that. I've been an operations engineer that's written, internal tools as a part of a platform product. And I've also been a software engineer that's written a ton of Terraform. And that, was a different experience. I think that's common, right? I think you all can probably talk about your experiences where the lines here are super blurred. But we do make distinctions on titles here for a reason. And like I said earlier, I think that's mostly marketing. But before I get to that, I think I also want to tell a story of what is the job I want to do and what makes me interested in this space overall. And then it's the story about what happens if I'm at a social gathering and someone comes and asks me what I do. And, if they don't care, most people don't care when they ask this question. I just say I'm a software engineer and they say cool. And then I ask them what they do and they say something cool and I say cool. And then we talk about something else, small talk. You've all done that. Every once in a while, someone will say, oh, what do you do in software engineering, right? And if they're not technical, I usually have this spiel about what it means to be, a site reliability engineer, or what it means to work on infrastructure. And my spiel usually starts with the idea that, most non-technical people understand that there's a server, right? And you can tell them about, back in the day, there used to be a server that a website was run on, and then there used to be a system administrator, which I think is important we talk about. Let's just add over here, sysadmin. It's nice that it's red over here, actually. A very traditional process here is you used to have a system administrator, and this system administrator would, configure a server, and you would run, the software developer would, build an app or deploy a website to a server, and a sysadmin would run that server. And then I would usually explain the story that, for modern large technical organizations, this is not really possible anymore, right? You can't have someone managing individual servers and individual applications running, right? In any modern organization, you have tens of thousands of servers and bits and bobs and different tools running at any given moment, right? You can't manually configure those. So what I do in my role is I write software to do that work, right? And I think that's the important part. I like writing software to do my job. And I think a lot of you probably relate. You're in this space because you're interested in a lot of different things. Like, I'm interested in infrastructure. I'm interested in defining reliability. I'm interested in observability, but I'm still interested in building production-ready software. At the root of it, that's what I'm interested in, not the individual tools I'm working on. And that is where I think the breakdown happens. Because unfortunately, not every organization is looking for someone that is looking to solve their problems in that way. And I think a really good example of this is the traditional sysadmin role. Now, when I told my story earlier about, you used to have a sysadmin that would configure and run a server by hand, back in the day, But that wasn't even really true either, right? Like tons of sysadmins were fully writing software to automate their job. That was a core principle of the practice. Google, before they quote unquote invented SRE in the last 15 years, didn't just have sysadmins SSHing into every Google server and setting everything up by hand. Of course, there was some level of automation here. And it's been great that we've standardized this practice and defined these roles and these specialties. There used to be sysadmins, and there's still sysadmins that use this software approach to solving their problems. Their problems may be more related to infrastructure and systems, but they're still using a software approach. Now, the problem is not every organization wants to do that. Or do they have the resources to pay for someone that they feel like wants to do that? Or they haven't modernized, or they haven't standardized, or they're using really old technology and they, just need to maintain something. And that's usually where, unfortunately, they've traditionally used the term sysadmin. When and I think a lot of people in the industry see the term sysadmin, they're thinking of someone that's going to be working a part of a cost center. And I think a lot of, software-focused folks are going to avoid that. And that's kind of a weird thing to do if you take a step back and think about it, because I think system administration is a separate set of skills that requires a specialty. And you want someone that's good at that job doing that job. The unfortunate truth and reality is there's a lot of roles that are going to be focused on maintenance and maybe not working on the most fun tech and maybe serves an important business use, but maybe is a part of a cost center. And if you're hiring for one of those roles, or you're in an organization that maybe doesn't have the budget, how you package and market and recruit for this role is important. And you saw this with sysadmins, right? You saw the dilution of the term system administrator to any maintenance-esque role, even though for the longest time, sysadmins were doing modern DevOps, for example, before we talked about what DevOps meant. Now, as time has progressed, though, I think it's fair to say a lot of folks in the industry have caught on to this idea that sysadmin a lot of times is associated, unfortunately, with this maintenance work, even if that isn't true. Even if there is tons of sysadmins today that write software in their job and solve real-world problems and are appropriately, hopefully, compensated for that. But I think we've caught on as an industry. I think it's fair to say that a majority of people that I work with aren't applying for sysadmin roles, even if there is work involved that's related to what they're doing. But I think the people hiring for these roles have caught on to this, right? Of course, they still want people to do that job. So they follow the industry. Maybe they're a little bit more behind, right? I think a lot of these roles, if they're not on the kind of cutting edge of tech, what are they thinking about? Well, they're thinking about, what do we call this? What do we call this role? And I think they've unfortunately moved to DevOps. And I think DevOps, even when it was kind of getting popular like 10 years ago, there was a big debate at the time about, hey, we don't want to call DevOps a role. We want to make sure that it's just a practice that is done by operations and software. But you see a lot of places, including places I've worked in my career, I've been a DevOps engineer, just calling this role DevOps. And unfortunately, I think the window has shifted so much that it's really rare to see a DevOps position at a large software-focused, product-focused organization unless they are doing what we consider to be the maintenance-esque sysadmin, cost center-esque work, right? They're probably working within IT, within the organization, right? That's the expectation we have when we see the DevOps role. Even though, like I said earlier in this video, that there's tons of DevOps engineers that are doing SRE work. There's tons of DevOps engineers that are doing straight software product development work embedded. But as the marketing has shifted for this role, you see a lot of those roles that are actually looking for people with software experience, finding that they probably, when they're marketing for DevOps, they're not getting the folks that they used to be getting, but they're now getting people looking for the sysadmin roles that are looking to level up what they believe taking a step in their career. Which again, I don't think it's true, right? I think there's different skills that I wish that we could isolate and hire for those specialties, but I think that's ignoring the marketing element of this. And I think over the last 5 years in particular, I've seen very few DevOps positions that are actually hiring for what I want to do, and that's building software to solve those problems, even if those problems are CI/CD. If you take a look at a lot of modern let's call it big tech organizations, they're hiring for a software engineer CI/CD or platform engineer CI/CD or SRE deployment, right? You don't see DevOps in the same sense. And when you do, unfortunately, you see this a part of or attached to their IT department, for example, working on their business needs, not necessarily only their product needs. And I think that's a distinction that's hurting the industry overall. And the really unfortunate thing about this is it doesn't just stop with DevOps, right? I think those roles are still going to exist. And I think as DevOps is going through the same thing sysadmin went through 20 years ago, I think they're finding that it's going to be hard to recruit for DevOps roles, or what they're prescribing to be DevOps roles, because I don't think I'm alone in this. I don't think there's a lot of discussion about this, but I know, talking to my colleagues, that I'm not the only one not applying to DevOps roles, even if some of us have true, real DevOps titled experience. So what is now happening? We're seeing a lot of those same roles now be titled SRE roles. And over the last few years, you've seen these SRE roles pop up that are very maintenance heavy, where they're not even traditional. None of these are following the practices of DevOps. None of them are doing good service ownership. None of these are, having real conversations about scaling systems and scaling organizations and like all the actual best practices. If you learn from like the, I was going to say Bible, but like the root of, the DevOps, like the Phoenix project, right? Like these DevOps roles aren't doing that. They're just need someone to maintain things in the corner. And that is unfortunate. And I think that's an organizational issue. But then you see those same places now titling those roles SREs. And you see these SRE roles, or, I've talked to certain folks where, they're reinventing ops essentially. And, that's unfortunate, because I think that becomes this whack-a-mole where you keep changing titles even though you're doing the same work or fundamentally similar work. So yeah, I think that's kind of a weird thing with our industry. I just kind of wanted to share my thoughts on this, because I tend to tell people to avoid DevOps roles now for no reason other than this shift that I'm mentioning now. And as a site reliability engineer, I'm starting to avoid some SRE positions and only go for platform and software engineer positions because of this shift, right? I'm seeing a lot of SRE roles that are on teams that aren't necessarily following what I think is modern software division of labor, let's call it. Well, yeah, that was my rant. Hope you found something interesting there. If not, tell me in the comments, or if you did, tell me. I don't care. Just whatever you think, tell me in the comments, because that's what we're supposed to do here. Otherwise, have a good day.